RotorHeads with Nick, Sage, and Johnny. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is episode 27 of RotorHeads. It's been a little while since we had an episode. It's been a couple of weeks. It's been a busy couple of weeks, and the snow and the slush has kind of started to fly in my neck of the woods. I don't know about you guys, but yeah, so it's been a little bit slow for us. I don't know. Has anybody gotten any flying in the last couple of weeks?
I have not flown since that time when I was in the forest, at least with my 700.
I haven't flown since that time I was in the forest.
Oddly specific.
That's a good one. I like that one. Oh man. Well, you turds, I went out and I burned some nitro yesterday.
Yay!
Last time I flew was like 2 months ago.
Wait, Sage, did you even tell us about the results of that flight?
No, because there were no results of that flight to tell. So I got an NX4, and it has not yet been started. So I was having some issues getting it started. I determined that the glow plug was bad, and so I replaced the glow plug and made sure it had a good one and replaced it with a good one. And I was like, okay, well, for sure it's going to fire up now. It has good compression, has good fuel source, so the only real... all things pointed to that. So it's a really tight space inside that helicopter. The frames are like an inch wide. What is that, like 25 millimeters?
25.4 millimeters.
Yeah.
That's how the inch is defined.
Yeah. Anyway, so the frame's like 25 millimeters wide. So you've got like no room to work in there. And then when you put the bigger motor in, the hole that they put in the front little piece of frame for you to change the glow plug with and stuff, it's not even lined up with the hole. So the hole in the head was already cross-threaded a little bit, like right off the bat. And so I think I'm going to just get a new head for that motor. Is what I'm going to end up having to do. I don't know. I haven't given up on it. I need to now pull it apart, though, because yesterday at the field, I could not get the glow to work. I don't know if it just wasn't making a good connection or what the deal was, but I could not get it to reliably light the glow plug. So I've got some troubleshooting I got to do there. I don't know. But I did fly the Compass Nitro yesterday because I wanted to fly something, and it had been probably a month, I think, since I had flown it. And last time I flew it, I was having the issues with it because my clunk line had fallen off, and so I got that all fixed. I used the Synergy clunk line, and that seems to be doing the trick. It's holding really well. I'm keeping the fuel tank all the way full now, just so that all those fittings and everything get submerged in the nitro and they won't dry out and crack. And yeah, other than that, so neither of you done any flying lately?
I've done real flying.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Did you do any? Has anybody done any heli shopping? Black Friday? Anybody get any Black Friday deals or anything?
No, because most of them at Mikado USA were gone before I woke up.
They've got VTX now. They've got VTX back.
Oh, that is new news. That's they just
and they're
haven't in
15% off.
And
for Black Friday.
They just posted like an hour ago. They're flying off the shelf. So
you better get on there probably before we're done recording. Your host.
Hey,
sorry, buddy.
I got all the blades I need right now. Everything's sitting happily, not flying, not crashing.
Yeah, I need blades, but I succumbed to a couple Black Friday deals, and I got some Gens Ace 5000 packs and a speed control for the Chronos coming.
What'd you pay for the 5000s?
About 80 each.
Oh man, that's actually a really good deal.
Yeah, they're the 45Cs. I picked up 6 of them.
Where was that at? I missed that one.
It's at A-Main. And
Ooh.
last I saw, they still had some in stock. So you should check that
man.
out. All of them are on sale over there.
That's a thing I may have to go look at right after this.
Yeah, so I'm going to use 2 of them for the EXO, and then the other 2 sets of them will be put together as stick packs for the Kronos. So I'll have 2 packs for each electric, basically, and then I'll have the nitros. So that should be plenty of flying for me next year. 4 helicopters, 2 electric, 2 nitro, 2 700s, 2 500s. Should be perfect.
Hooray.
Yeah.
I scored a Black Friday deal as well. I ordered a new computer.
Oh, yeah.
Hooray. Yeah, it's pretty much a powerhouse that's good for the next 5 years of gaming, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely should be, especially you're probably future-proofed at 1080p.
Yeah. Also, it's pretty much VR ready, so if we ever get VR in accuracy. I just wanted to transition to new things in accuracy because that's pretty much fitting right now as we were talking about the workbench.
Okay, well then speaking of a new workbench.
Hooray. Yeah, we thought, the old workbench is so ancient and it wasn't even pleasing to the eye, really. It was just like a dark, evil cave, a bad cave or something. So we thought, hey, why not make something new? And well, what you're seeing on the screen right now is the result. I modeled up a pretty little hobby room with an actual workbench that does not look like it's from a Batman movie. And Sage did an awesome job in Substance Painter, making it look nice. And, well, we have a new workbench now. And it makes the sim, 10 times more enjoyable during setup.
I agree. I think it's much more pleasant to be in that little hobby room than it was to be in the dark cave.
Yep. I still wonder what the backstory behind that cave was.
I don't know.
Gotta ask Zane. It was weird. Oh well. I really like what we ended up with, and I mean it's on beta right now. It probably is even on public as you're watching this. And we have hidden a couple nifty little Easter eggs in it. See if you find them and tell us if you do.
Yeah, send us a screenshot if you see anything.
Yeah, and speaking of new content, this update will have the Synergy 516, which I'm flying or looking at currently, the 766, which Sage is flying currently. It will have some new keybinds to switch RPMs without having to use a switch on your transmitter. What else is new? I can't even think of.
I'm going to say that 516 in the sim flies real nice. I'm not a very big fan of the synergies, but in the sim, that thing flies extremely nice.
Well, thank you. That thing really quickly got an all-time favorite of mine in the sim. It's like one of the best helis we have.
Yeah, it flies pretty darn nice.
I mean, it's no Logo 700, but... Anyway... So,
yeah.
Do we have any more AccuRC news?
Cool new stuff. Also a couple new components you can use across the model range. Mac is super close. Zane is just too much of a perfectionist to actually release something.
Trying to get more speed out of the hardware.
Yeah.
Is there no Mac version at all right now?
It exists. It's just hasn't been released at all.
I mean,
okay, that's what I was trying to figure out. I wasn't sure if there was been a version at all released.
It's up, it's running, you can fly it. Just Zane doesn't want to release it because he wants to squeeze out more performance. So, yeah, hang in there. We are getting close. Maybe we will even have something as you are hearing this. I don't know. Check the Facebook page of Accuracy. It will be posted there. Yeah, but I think that is it for Accuracy. Do we have any outside world news?
Man, let's see. Any Heli news since we
IRL
recorded
news.
last?
If it's any real Heli news, yes. Any RC news,
Okay, do full scale.
VTX are in stock.
Yeah,
There's
that's
only, I mean, I'm sure there's
not
been
for long. Not for long.
It's been so long since we've like talked about anything RC. I feel like that there had to have been something new. No,
I mean, Scorpion is still testing the 300 amp 14 SESC that
they're pre-ordering that now. The 300.
Oh,
it's not exactly Heli news, but I have one other cool thing Heli related that I'm going to get this week.
All right, what's that?
My Copper Dock motor.
Oh, ooh,
Cooper Duck.
Yeah.
That's fancy.
Sweet.
For what? The EXO, right?
For the EXO, yeah. I wanted something that was a lot lower KV, in case they came out with the 550 stretch, and just because I like lower head speeds anyway, and it's hard to get lower head speeds without
low head speed on a compass. Aren't those like not hurting?
No, when's that ever been a problem?
It's like stock out of the box 3,000.
Well, you know,
It's
just
also
because
stuck out of the
stuck
box
out of
like
the box.
4 kilograms. Yeah, what does your EXO weigh? I'm curious.
Hold on, let me grab a calculator real quick.
But
Wow.
I mean, that frame, it's sexy. It doesn't matter how much it weighs.
It weighs about 2.4 kilograms.
That is
What do you say, Johnny?
light. Nick, you had full scale stuff.
Oh, yeah. There's only been like 8 crashes in the past 2 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Half of them I think I've sent you guys. They
That's
just
good.
had another one yesterday, and it was of a brand new helicopter that supposedly they had just gotten, and they rolled it over on the ramp.
Oh my gosh! Like on
They haven't figured
like
out
Maiden?
like what happened yet. No, I don't think it was made. It was made for the company, I guess, from what I heard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a big, huge helicopter too, and they rolled it over on the ramp.
Well, what model?
Is the EH-101?
Oh my god!
Yeah. So
The
that happened.
triple turbine setup.
So yeah, they just rolled one of those over.
Why?
I haven't heard
How?
exactly why it happened, but that happened.
Man, that's freaky.
That was one of the fun news ones.
Well, not so much for that company. That's lacking a couple million now.
Hope you had insurance ready. But I don't think there was any other news otherwise in anything, was there? That we're missing?
I can't think of
I
anything
don't know.
that's like brand new.
Alright, well, should we just transition into our topic?
Sure.
I think so.
Well, first, should we mention about our new episode format we're going to go to?
Yes, that's probably a good thing to mention.
Well, we forgot that.
Yes.
So,
through the winter, all three of us live in climates where it makes flying pretty much difficult, if not impossible, to work into the normal routine. And so through these winter months, while we're not flying very much, we are going to slow down the episode production to one a month. That way we can take a little more time, put out quality episodes, keep things coming, but it's got to reflect the amount of time that we can put into the rest of the hobby. And during these winter times, it's just things slow down, and the rest of the life gets busy as well. So, yep, we will be going to one a month for the next probably 3 or 4 months, and then we will be back and probably going to one every 2 weeks at that point.
Yep.
yeah, with the slower news and stuff, there's not much to push every single week. Like as you can tell, we were struggling with news today, trying to remember everything.
Yep.
But it's just, we figured it'd be better if we did them every other week. That way it's not.
Also
let's just
helps
sit
me
here
a
and talk
lot.
about nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. Also helps me a lot because I have exams through all of February. I am gone pretty much every weekend in December. So, yeah.
Yep. So we'll keep the stuff coming, but it's going to slow down a little bit. And
it'll give us time to prepare if you have any questions to find out information if we don't know what you ask. So
yeah.
that'll help too. What's this do? Good question.
I have no idea.
Learning
Sorry, my
opportunity.
life.
Okay, so we have a topic today. Nick, what is that?
It is VBar tuning and how to do it. Not necessarily how to do it, more what everything is.
Yep, that also includes the long-anticipated PID explanation thingy, which we're gonna do and try to do. And yeah, I think we should actually start out with that because no flybarless works without PID. So, Pid. Let's first try to understand what PID does. So, back in the days we had flybars. That was like 100 years ago, and many new pilots will not even remember what a flybar was. But a flybar was basically a mechanical gyro. I can actually load a flybar model. That was consisted of a bar with two paddles on the end that was free to pivot around the rotor head. Why am I going into this? Well, because because a flybar is your most basic PID controller, pretty much. So,
okay, can you actually... I'm actually really looking forward to this explanation because this might be able to help me a lot. So how does a flybar like natural PID controller?
Well, if you look at the linkages here, you have... Let's start out with... let's take a different approach. So your helicopter is in the air and you want it stabilized. You do not want it to do unintended rotational rates like control inputs. Like if you give any control input, if you move the cyclic, your helicopter is going to rotate about that axis. You do not want that to happen. And that is what you use a PID loop for, to get input from that movement, be it through a gyro, be it through the flybar, feed that back to the rotor blades and counter that movement. So it is basically a closed feedback loop. Helicopter moves, something senses that and counteracts that movement.
Okay.
So what a flybar does when it pivots around, like it can tilt left and right, and that basically alters the pitch of the blades. So if you imagine the blades turning and the helicopter is mid-air, that flybar acts like a gyroscope. A gyroscope basically stays fixed in place as it rotates, right?
Right.
So if your helicopter starts to tilt, that flybar is going to retain its position and is going to feed a constant cyclic input to the blades that counters that rotation. The further the helicopter tilts, the more input the flybar gives back.
So then how do you tune, before we even move into flybarless then, what are the tuning possibilities with the flybar? I know that I've heard, because when I first started in the hobby, flybar helicopters were still around. Flybarless was just starting to be really popular. So there are things I've heard, like different weighted paddles and different maybe lengths of the flybar. Are there good analogs for that in what we do with flybarless?
Yeah, pretty much. Heavier paddles will basically give you more overall gain.
So more gain. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
That also affects terminal rates because it's still a mechanical flybar, but in its most basic form, it gives you more stabilization of the helicopter. You can also alter the ratios of the linkages, which also helps in that aspect. So you have basically a shit ton of tuning possibilities with a flybar.
Cool.
It probably is too much to explain in that episode here, because I really just want to go into the basic principle of a flybar before we move on to flybarless. So what I'm getting at here is, if you look at this flybar rotor head, I have basically the ability to change the pitch of the blades without affecting the pedals. So you see this linkage going up from the flybar to this bell crank lever up to the blade. This is basically my P gain in my normal control loop of flybarless. So that is direct pass through from the swash blade to the blades. Now if I move my elevator, you see I'm not changing the pitch of the blades, I'm just changing the pitch of the pedals. That resembles my integral. And when I said it would be a basic PID loop, I lied, it's just a PI loop because there's no derivative in this. So if I give the flybar a constant input, it will change its position in space, and it will drag the rotor behind.
So it's like a filtered input almost?
It's
like
basically
like the flybar is filtering your input?
Yeah, the flybar is an indirect way of inputting. That is basically what your integral is doing. It's basically increasing over time as you have an error. That's also the same with drift. The further the helicopter drifts, the more input it feeds back. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's cool for understanding it on a mechanical machine. So if we switch back to the 516 I had loaded before, we can get into actual flybarless settings, flybarless PID settings. And I have drawn a little image that I sent to you guys before.
Yep.
And you have a basic graph of omega in degrees per second, which is your rotational rate, over time in seconds. So what you're looking at right now is a graph that shows you an error that is basically your rotational rate. So let's assume this is a helicopter drifting. So the red part of the curve shows that the helicopter accelerates into a rate and holds that rate as soon as the curve flattens out. That is basically what we're looking at currently. The helicopter starts to move and to rotate at an unwanted rate. So how does PID come into play here? P stands for proportional. So what P does is it gives a counter input to that rate error right as it's happening. So I drew that here in green. So you see basically the green line is an exact mirror image of the error that you're seeing. It's proportional. The more rate error you get, the larger P gets. And if the rate error is constant, P is a constant output against that rate. Makes sense, right?
That makes sense. Can I ask a question that's going to clarify how that pertains maybe to the real world a little bit?
Sure.
So when I adjust my P gain up or down in my flybarless unit, is that adjusting the quickness with which the proportional input is given?
No, that just scales the magnitude of the counter input it's giving.
Okay.
So let's assume my Synergy 516 here, which I am looking at, is constantly backflipping with a rate. And then the P gain, all it would do is give a constant cyclic input forward to counter that. No movement of the swash, it would be a constant input on a constant backflip. Like, say, your servo failed, it would try to give that constant input. Okay, that is a basic controller, but it would not fly your helicopter well. A pure P gain will just dampen the error, but it will not hold your position. That is what old rate gyros were. Just a P gain that basically counteracts your rate, but it does not basically keep the tail in place. The tail could drift left or right, you had to trim it. And that was basically how normal gyro worked. It would also drag behind in the wind. It would just dampen.
Right.
By giving a proportional output to the rate you're seeing. So let's move on to integral. Integral is basically what the name says, an integral. If you heard that in school, great, you know what I'm talking about. If not, let me explain. I drew that in blue on my little curve, and what integral does is basically it sums up the area under the curve of the error. Now that might seem complicated, but I think I can clarify this a bit. So we're just gonna focus on the blue line that droops away. So if you look at the error, in the part after it rises, it's constant. So what the integral does is it looks at the time that has passed in which the error occurred, and for every bit of time that's passed, it adds a little bit to its output. So the longer the error stays consistent, the longer the output will rise. So let's say the helicopter just started drifting. The integral is going to be at 0. 10 seconds later, it's going to be larger. 20 seconds later, it's going to be even larger. So it sums up with time until that error is corrected. If that makes sense.
So what's it do after it's corrected? After it's corrected, I see that it shoots like almost in a linear fashion down towards the bottom corner.
No, that's not corrected. That's when the error is still occurring. So in the first part, you see it rise linearly. That's where it's going to be like a x to the power of 2 curve. So we're not even going into that. But after that, when the error basically is constant, the integral is going to rise and rise and rise until that error is corrected.
Okay, I see.
And that is basically what enables heading lock. By summing up over time how much error you had, you can basically backtrack to where the system was before. So when the error starts, it starts summing up the error over time, and then it can basically tell where the helicopter was before it started drifting. It's a bit hard to understand, but that's basically what it does. It just basically sums up the error over time and can therefore tell you, oh, hey, your helicopter just drifted for that amount of time over that amount of degrees. Please rotate it back.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what integral does. It keeps track of how long the error persisted and sums it up. And then we have D. D is giving people the most trouble, but it's actually the easiest to understand. What D does is it takes the derivative of the curve. Again, if you heard it in school, cool, you know what it does. It just takes the slope of the curve and corrects for the slope. The slope of the curve in that graph is basically the angular acceleration. So as long as you have a change in angular rate and rotational rate, D is going to give you an output. D does not care if your helicopter is sitting flat or rotating at a constant rate. It's not going to give you an output there. But as soon as the rate changes, say you're going from 180 degrees per second to 300 degrees per second, D is going to go nuts on that one. So in the first part of the curve, you see basically the error rising to the level it then holds. And in that part, the D gain gives you a constant output against that. As soon as the error levels out and goes to a constant rotational rate, D does not care anymore. It just goes back to where it was before, to 0. So it basically looks at the slope of the rotational rate and corrects for that. So naturally, if you have a larger change in rotational rate, so for example, you get a really quick change in rotational rate, like, I know, when Nick talked about the overrolling EH101 earlier, that thing hooks up with the wheel and then is suddenly jerked into a high rotational rate that would slam it into the ground. D is going to be huge because it detects a huge slope in that rotational rate curve.
So
on contrast,
oh, go ahead.
Wait. on contrast, if you have just a very slow change in rotational rate, like what do I know, a helicopter rotor starting up, that kind of slow acceleration, D is not going to care much. It's going to stay small, it's going to stay low. It's not going to give you a large output to compensate for that. So it looks at the slope of the error curve, basically. As long as that's 0, D is going to be 0. Okay, Sage, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to ask is, with this PID tuning, the way our flybarless systems work, do they... I'm trying to figure out how to word this question. Does the microprocessor in the flybarless unit take all the information from the separate PID loops and then combine them there to figure out how to command the servos, or is there some sort of direct correlation between what P, I, and D are doing and the commands that are outputted to the servos? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah. So PID are individual parts of one control loop. Okay. Before they are given out of the loop, they're all added together.
Okay,
and
so
whatever
is running this control loop, whatever processor is running this control loop, the control loop is basically ultimately solving for a problem to give it one value, and that one value will be used for the command that's outputted.
Yeah, I mean, it goes like the following. You get an error, it's put into PI and D. PI and D do their thing, calculate their correction. These corrections are added together and fed forward to whatever controls your servo or something. You get one signal out of it, and your 3 individual gains, P, I, and D, you can set them up on Brain, for example. That lets you do P, I, and D individually. Those just basically set the magnitude of these outputs. So if you, for example, set integral to 0, the integral will still calculate, but it's scaled to 0. And then you will get a 0 output, and the integral is just not active anymore.
Okay.
In that total number that's being outputted.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay. That was kind of long, but it will help us a lot understand VBar tuning. Because I think we should just go through the VBar numbers as they appear on screen, and I am unprepared and do not have anything open that resembles that. So
that's okay.
I should
go ahead and get it open.
Probably grab my helicopter. I have my helicopter. I have my radio. And we're plugging that in.
Ooh, the good old VBar sound.
Okay, so I guess I'm still a little bit muddy on how the whole picture works. I'm getting closer. Got one more question to ask you about the system in general and how PID fits into it. So you're saying that you detected there's an error detected, right? You get some drift due to the wind. That error is detected by
3 sensors.
What?
3 rate sensors.
Okay, by the gyros and the sensors in it.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
1 second. Switching off the wheel sounds on the V control because it's kind of annoying. So you have 3 sensors in your flybarless. They all give out a signal for rotational rate. Okay.
Right. And so I can visualize that. It's like if you take your phone, there's apps that will output in numerically your raw accelerometer data. So I'm kind of familiar with like what kind of data the sensors would be putting out. It would just be raw number data, right?
Pretty much, yeah. Just actually, it's probably a voltage, but yeah, pretty much that.
But by the time it gets to the microprocessor into the PID loop, right? It's been translated. Or do the PID...
It,
oh my god.
That doesn't even matter. You just gotta know the PID loop gets a number from the sensor, processes it, and puts out a different number that's your control input. Because it also gets your, like... It's not only the rates from the sensors that go in it, it's also the control inputs from your radio, because these basically are also errors to the current rotational rate. So that's
okay. I guess
all mixed together.
I guess that muddies things for me to call your control inputs errors. I get how they're errors to the rate, kind of, but at the same time, how does it, if the PID loop treats them all as errors? Why does the helicopter not fight against your control inputs, I guess, is the only way I can ask that.
Because you have a value that you currently have from the sensors and a value that you want to achieve from your control input.
Okay.
And basically what your control input does, it shifts the ideal position for the PID loop where it wants to go with those numbers. Like if you give a control input, it's basically a rate error, and the PID loop wants to achieve that rate.
It wants to achieve that error. Basically.
Yeah, exactly. It wants to achieve the rate you are requesting. So that's the new zero position.
So the new
gonna
error.
give you...
Okay, sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
It's actually that you're shifting the zero position of the sensor.
Okay, but then so what you're referring to as the error then is actually whatever the difference is between this new set point and your current
point. I should have worded it like that. So your
no,
helicopter
it's
is
okay.
not moving.
I've heard this explained a million times, and the word error always messes with me because I've always had a hard time understanding it. Now I understand what it means in that context. So when you're saying that the control inputs introduce an error, what that means is your control inputs give a new set point that the PID then has to work to achieve. And the difference between the new set point and the place where you're at is the error. I always understood it as the way it's always taught, the way it sounds to me is that set point is what was being referred to as quote unquote the error, whereas that's not what the case is, and that actually helps me a lot to understand this.
The way you just said that actually made me understand what the hell you were talking about.
Yeah,
I was on the same page. I'm like, what is going on? Once you started telling me that, like, it's trying to achieve the new error, that made more sense with the set point.
Yeah. So the cool. Actual error is just that your helicopter is not moving. You're telling it rotate at 300 degrees per second, and the error is that your helicopter is still sitting at 0.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's
got that now.
So it's seeing that 0 from the sensor and thinking, I got an error here. I should be at 300. Let's push out some numbers that correspond to whatever my PID loop has been coded to and get that heli rotating.
Yep. Yeah, that makes perfect sense now. So if you drift, you get an error. And that's the difference between stable, hover, and the drift. And a control input is an error, and that's the difference between your commanded rate and the rate it currently is. Bam.
Exactly.
So, riddle me this one, Batman.
Okay.
So when you're doing an auto trim, is that simply unlocking where it thinks the home point is and adjusting its essential home point?
What the auto trim does is it shifts the center of your swash plate around, like the basic center point. So what you have to realize is that the VBar always discharges the integral, because if you're sitting on the ground and the helicopter is just like, you're just having a little stick input, that integral would run away and eventually tip over your helicopter as it's rising over that tiny little error you have. And that would tip over your helicopter. So the VBar discharges the integral over a certain time, Otherwise, the swash plate would stay in place. So on a blade heli, you can see that when the motor is running and you push forward on the stick, the swash plate is going to stay forward until you shut off the motor. The VBar will discharge the integral over a couple of seconds, so the swash plate will go back to 0.
Oh, that makes so much more sense. The 3Digi actually has that as a setting. You can actually set up your own graph for how you want the integral to discharge. And that makes
cool.
a lot more sense to me now, why that's all in there.
Yeah, and if you're sitting in a hover and it's constantly discharging that integral, it may happen that you get a drift because it's discharging that integral too fast. So it's looking for that center point of the system where it can discharge the integral to without the helicopter actually drifting. That's what it's doing.
Okay. That makes sense now.
Cool. And then we also have auto trim explained.
Boy, you're teaching us all kinds of stuff today.
I figured we should jump ahead to that one since it was kind of going to be related around that.
Yeah. Good question, Nick.
Well,
yeah, but if
that covers PID, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now how do we use this to make our V-bars fly better if we have V-bars?
So
turn it on and go.
I mean, you can totally do that. You can go through the basic setup and go flying. That works.
That's what I do.
Yep. Till every once in a while I have a shake and I'm like, Johnny, how do I fix it?
Dampers.
You're
Gains. Right. So yeah, let's start out with the gain on the V-bar. This one is just a number from whatever it is, 0 to 120, that scales your entire control loop. So if you change your gain, you change P, I, and D at the same time. If your gain is too low, you may see drift, you may see the helicopter not achieving the rates you're asking from it in a quick and crisp fashion. On the contrary, if your gain is too high, you might see the helicopter over-controlling. So basically, if the sensors see an error, they are actually overshooting, undershooting, overshooting until they level out on that spot. That's basically how your ABS on your car is working. Because it's using hydraulics and these brake pads and has to build up friction, it's basically too slow to actually brake efficiently. So what it does when you slam on the brakes, it locks the wheels, it opens them up, it locks them again, it opens them up, and it finds that point to which it has to set the brakes to get the maximum tire traction without the tires slipping. So it overshoots, undershoots, overshoots, undershoots. That's the stuttering you notice. Like the brake pedal.
Like mind-blowing.
Yeah, it starts to shudder because it closes the brakes, opens the brakes, closes the brakes, opens the brakes until it finds that spot where the tire does not lock up.
You've used a word that I've never heard anybody else use when talking about PID in reference to these fly bars and adjusting it, and that's by specifying that it's the magnitude of the different units with the sliders. That makes a lot more sense why when you add too much you get this fast wag and stuff.
Just overcompensating.
It is, but it makes sense why the changes happen so fast when it's the magnitude of everything that you're actually changing, the magnitude of the values. So it's like it makes more sense to me now because it's like, okay, so you have this, say you have the slider set to whatever it comes at the default, and I'm just making up these numbers. This is for whatever. It's not for VBar. This is just to help me understand the PID loop and how a flybarless deals with it. So you have it at the default, whatever. So it's processing whatever errors, and maybe we'll pretend the default is like 10x, whatever comes out, whatever spit out. If you up the slider, then you're going to 100 times that value, and you lower the slider, you're going down 8 times, 5 times, 6 times that value, instead of directly. I always thought of it as you still are directly affecting. I always thought of it as you were directly adjusting these output values somehow, and really, sliding it is changing the magnitude. It makes it make a lot more sense to me why these changes are so apparent.
Yeah,
I don't know. I was
Easy as
hoping you
that.
could make that make more sense.
And if if you're wondering now, if you're changing the magnitude, why isn't it changing the rate? That's because it's getting direct feedback from the sensors. You're giving it a total rate, and it's still not there. So eventually, it just takes a bit longer for the control loop to reach that input. Like by changing the magnitude, you're not limiting the output of the control loop. You're just changing how much output per time gives you what output to the swash plate.
Right.
Think that makes sense? Cool.
But yes. So this probably depends on the different flybarless units. The amount of magnitude that the slider represents, it probably differs per flybarless unit, I imagine, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, your gain just scales the entire control loop. If it's too high, it overshoots, undershoots, starts to wobble. And this can even happen without a previous control input because it just sees a tiny bit of error and just magnifies that and does not get out of its wobbles because it amplifies its own issue, basically its own error. So that's what gain too high does and why it's so dangerous to fly with gains too high, because it may take control from you if it runs into these limits. So yeah, my advice is always start at a lower gain, increase it by 10 points every time, and then see, can you get it to wobble, can you not get it to wobble. If you can get it to wobble, back off 10 points and you're good.
That's for
my
VBar.
test, yeah, my test for any heli, any flybarless wobbling is doing right rudder pyro flips, because right rudder slightly increases your rotor RPM. We've had this before. If you're turning to the right with 360 degrees per second, your rotor RPM is going to increase by 60 RPM, because 360 degrees per second are 60 revolutions in a minute, and that basically adds up to your rotor RPM, as your ESC does not know what yaw rate you're at. So that slightly increases rotor RPM and suffices to make the heli wobble if your gain is close to the edge of what's possible. So yeah, I do right pyro flips and adjust my gain downward until those don't wobble anymore, and then I'm pretty much good.
So what can you do if you're not doing pyro flips yet? What kind of maneuver can you do to kind of test your gains? Hard stops maybe, or what would you use?
Yeah, so the first axis that's gonna start to wobble is aileron, because it has a lower moment of inertia than elevator. So if you just flick your aileron stick left and right, you will see wobbles. Well, with a VBar, actually, it's damped down. It's really, really hard to get a VBar to actually wobble. So that's pretty much not happening. So on a VBar, you actually want to look at elevator. When it starts to bounce just a tiny bit, you might be a bit high on your gain. But again, it's so optimized that usually doesn't happen. So really just the right rudder pyro flips are what reveals it to me. I don't encounter any wobbles on my regular flying except for right rudder pyro maneuvers.
Okay.
The VBar is like really, really smart with that kind of stuff. Okay, so now that we have your main gain through, I would like to continue at style, because people are really confused what style is. No one really knows pretty much what it is, what it does. People just kind of know how it feels, but they don't know what's behind it. And it's actually it's it's actually really easy. Style is just your ratio between P and D. So if you increase your style to a higher number, actually I think I can shut off my helicopter because it's annoying as hell. If you increase your style to a higher number, you're just increasing the D gain in the control loop and lowering the P gain in the control loop of the main rotor. So what that does is, as the D gain looks for the acceleration, it's way more precise at achieving your rates. Let me explain you how if I think about it for a sec. Yeah, so P gain is gonna give you like the same output for the same rate error every time. So if you move your stick to full deflection, it basically does not matter to P gain how quickly you achieve it, it just follows the stick. What D gain does is the quicker you move the stick, the more input it will give to the rotor head to follow that movement, because it looks for the basically acceleration, the angular acceleration of the error, so how quickly your error changes. This is really technical and complicated, so just know higher style increases D gain, which makes the heli way more precise in following your rate inputs, way quicker and precise to compensate for wind as well, because wind can also induce errors, so it makes the helicopter more locked in place, and it just feels more robotic, because the heli is following your stick much closer to what you're actually doing. This also takes out some of the over-controlling you can get with low style, because P is just spitting out a number based on the rate error. That can mean that it can overshoot what it's actually wanting to do and kind of feel more like lively, more vivid is what they describe it as, but it's less precise. Higher D gain will actually allow the helicopter to reach the target rate faster. That's essentially what style does. Does that make sense?
But with less precision.
More D is more precise. It just is less lively because the helicopter, like, if you have a lot of P, it can just output a number based on the rate error you're basically requesting by moving your stick. That can make the helicopter overshoot and it can make the helicopter undershoot. Again, VBar is very, very optimized here, so it's not that dramatic. You will just notice a difference in the response feeling from the stick. It's kind of hard to describe. I suggest you just go out and try it out and see what feels best to you. But the effect is the same on all helicopters, and it's noticeable the same on all helicopters. Low style is really vivid. That can also kind of make your stops bounce back a bit, because the P gain does not look at the acceleration and just gives you an output that corrects for the rate error. So yeah, it's really just a thing of precision.
Right, so it feels so the less D so the lower your style, right? The less D you have.
Yep, more P,
and
less D, and that
so
in a
the more it's
going
to be more like a rate gyro. More like, not like, but in that it's more of just the P affecting.
You cannot really compare that with a rate gyro, because a rate gyro does not have the integral.
Okay, but so the style doesn't touch the integral at all.
Nope, style only is P to D. You can actually see that if you open the old VBar software 5.3 and save two setups, one with style 40 and one with style 120, you can actually just compare these two files and you'll see these two exact parameters change, P and D. Text editor. Yep, that's pretty much what it does. Higher style, quicker, follows the stick quicker, but is less prone to over-controlling. So I actually like high styles for that exact reason. It follows exactly what I'm asking from the helicopter. It's precise, it's nice, it holds its position in space very well. Like, D-gain is actually neat for compensating for wind, so it's less wobbly and stuff in wind. Pretty much absolute win.
So what else do you get concerned with when tuning your VBar for feel?
Obviously agility. Like, that is just your target rate. Basically, the new set point you're giving the PID loop is scaled with that over your stick range. So agility basically tells it how quick to rotate. There's nothing more to it really. It just Yeah, it gives you a rate for that. With a Neo, you can actually overdrive the rate over what the sensors are capable of picking up, which is quite interesting because the Neo sensors are a bit slower than the old blue line and silver line sensors. So you can actually go into a uncontrolled area, and this is where your optimizers come in, because what the optimizers do is they're basically a bypass value directly to the rotor head. So you can imagine that, like, you give it a stick input and the VBar gives that stick input to the servos without question. If your optimizer is at 0, that stick input pass through is going to be 0. If it's at 100, it's going to be your cyclic ring value, so the maximum deflection you can get out of your rotor system. And what the optimizer is there for is that you basically set it to a point where it exactly matches the cyclic pitch it's giving the blades with the rate you're requesting. On the VBar, it's always 50% of your set rate. So if you set your rate to 100, your optimizer is going to be at 50. 120 will set the optimizer to 60, and on odd numbers, it's going to interpolate. And yeah, the optimizer pretty much tries to match the pass-through value to the agility you're requesting. That's all it does, unload the control loop and make the reaction precise and quick. That's also why the Heli might seem sluggish to accelerate with lower optimizer values. Like if you go to 30% or 20% of your set agility, it's going to feel sluggish and slow because the helicopter accelerates based on that PID output. If it's too high, it feels like it's constantly overshooting. It's overshooting the rate and coming back down, and on stops it's also bouncing back because it gives too much, like it's recovering from too much input. So that's ideally set in a way that without any control loops you would still get the same rate out of the helicopter as with the control loops on.
Optimizers, you mean?
Yep. Did I say something else?
So your optimizers just do are kind of like a center stick feel kind of option?
No, because you should not adjust your center stick feel via the optimizers. The optimizers are just a value that unloads the control loop. You're not really unloading it as, well, it's a control loop and it's calculating anyway, but you want to get that error that it sees as close to 0, basically.
Yes.
So if you, on a Neo, you can do that. You can turn your gain all the way to 0. The optimizers are going to be the only thing affecting your agility.
Okay.
As simple as that. It's just a pass-through from your stick to your rotor directly without any control loop interfering.
Okay.
With agile blades, you want to set this a little lower. With VTX blades, about 40% of your set agility. All other flyerless blades on the market are fine with 50. Heavy scale blades may even require a 60% set of the optimizer. Note that I'm saying percent because the optimizer is an absolute value coupled to your cyclic ring, which determines how much cyclic pitch you can give it. So if I say 60%, I do not mean 60 on the optimizer. 60% of 100 would be a 60, 60% of a 50 agility would, for example, be 30 on the optimizer. So keep that in mind. So yeah, that usually sets itself if you switch it on and do a couple flips. With VTX, just set it to 40% of your agility and be good. It cannot really adjust to VTX because I don't know why. Weird shit.
Well, what else is there if I'm trying to tune my VBar up like a pro?
There's also the integral setting. The integral setting basically is just your integral, how much it's correcting. So if you're flying speed, you want to increase that a bit. It gives you that more locked feeling. Basically, you don't really have to touch it because, again, the VBar is really optimized, but it can help with tracking in fast forward flight. It can help with precise hovering, all that kind of stuff. What I explained earlier, it just sums up the error, and by changing the integral value, you're changing essentially that. So they have a parameter called Heli Size, and what that does is, again, it scales the control loop to match different sizes. But what it does, if you set it to like the value for an 800, you can read all that stuff up on vstabby.info. I think it's a 70. What it does is it's actually going to discharge the integral a bit slower because large helis have a higher rotational moment of inertia. And if you stop them, you want to have that integral standing in there just a tiny bit longer to get that stop more precise. That's what they had, the extreme firmware on the old VBars. That's all integrated into version 6 now with the Heli Size parameter. So basically, if you increase that, it's going to take away a bit of your like the vividness of the helicopter for more precise stops. And vice versa. It just scales the control loop to match different sizes of helicopters.
Cool.
But basically go off their recommended
Except that
settings.
I'm just using 60 for my 700 because it feels so much better than 50. Just saying.
Ian, where at?
Heli Size. 50 is the size for a 700 they recommend, and 60 probably for an 800, but I like 60 because it's just more precise and stops. Keeps that integral a bit longer. Makes the stop more on point.
Okay.
What else do we have? Main rotor should be it. They also have elevator precompensation, but in my entire career, I have not once touched elevator precompensation. That's just a tiny bit of elevators that's given on hard collective inputs to compensate for differences in drag across the helicopter.
Oh, like so for like a bigger tail boom on a Goblin maybe, or
yeah,
or
you
like on
want
the
to compensate
Synergy
for
that
that.
has this massive tail boom shroud.
Yep. So if you see your helicopter pitching back or forth in climbs just ever so slightly, you can adjust that, but it's usually not necessary. I'm about to switch my helicopter back on because I don't really know if there's anything worth talking. Oh yeah, pedal simulation.
Okay.
Haha. Okay, pedal simulation basically is a modifier for your stick input. So pedal sim happens actually before the control loop, is what you have to understand. And what it does, it does not simulate a flybar. You wouldn't want that with all the drifts and imperfections. All it does is it takes into consideration how quickly you're moving the stick, so basically the derivative of your stick position, the acceleration on your stick, and adjusts the target rate upwards for a set amount of time based on that. So if you're slowly pushing that stick forward, like in 3 or 4 seconds, that's not going to do much. If you slam it forward, it might actually tell the control loop, hey, target rate, 400, 400, 400. Oh, 350, 300, 300, 300, if your target rate is set to like something at 300 degrees per second. So the faster you move that stick, the higher the initially requested rate just for the duration of the acceleration will be. So you get a quicker, crisper acceleration with more cyclic pitch, with no interference with the control loop. So what it's basically doing is it pretends to push the stick further than you can actually push it until the target rate is reached.
Right.
That makes sense, I hope.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah,
for the
it sharpens up your response of center, but it does not interfere with the control loop, the stops, the stabilization, anything. It's just a modifier for your stick input.
Sure.
That might be it for the main rotor. Should be. is.
Whoa, wow. We're already at an hour. Do you think we need to do a part 2 with VBar tail tuning?
I
Do you have
mean, this
enough
is
to
the
do a whole
last.
nother?
Nah, this is the last part of our this season basically of RotorHeads, so I think we can go a bit longer here.
Okay, no problem.
I can also go flying again because why not? I'm sitting on the ground and talking my mouth off. So yeah, tail tuning. That is pretty much a PID loop as well. So, explanation from main rotor, gain applies. You're just scaling the entire loop. Explanation from main rotor, rate applies. You're just changing what you're telling the loop to achieve as a rate. And well, they actually let you set P, I, and D individually here, so that's quite neat. So you can tune your tail with the knowledge you gained earlier.
So do you not actually have direct access to PI and D for the head in VBar?
For the head, no. You only have I and basically P and D through style, but they keep it in a range that's flyable because you can easily mess up if you have full access. They only give you full access on the tail, which is kind of nice.
Now, the range values that they give you access to on the tail, are they somewhat limited so that you can't get it way too far out of bounds?
Nope, you can set everything from 0 to 100.
Oh, okay.
I think it's 100. Oh, well, so yeah, P proportional, I integral, D derivative. Interestingly, the tail in its very default state is just a PI loop, so D is set to 0. And, well, D is really not necessary on a VBar tail most of the time. I use a tiny bit on helicopters with slow tail servos to just give larger corrections to starting rates acceleration. It helps a lot with wind as well. So, yeah. How do you tune the VBar tail? Or any PID tail in general? So, it's rather easy. You want to start out with the default values. Then you want to increase your overall gain until it starts to wag quickly. That basically determines how much P gain you can give it. The default values are actually weighted in a way that it works for most helicopters. I think P is default at 80 and I at 60. So you have quite a bit of room to play there. So yeah, increase your gain until it wags. What I do is a simple right rudder funnel that drags the tail behind. That pretty much reveals immediately if your gain is too high. So if it starts to wag quickly there, just reduce it by 5 to 10 points and you're good with P. Now what you want to do is just fly in a straight line and start pirouetting to the right. If the tail starts to kind of bound on you, like go slower on the, like when it's pushing against the wind from flying forward against the air resistance, then it's going slower there and speeding up on the retreating side, then you want to increase I gain a bit. Don't increase it too much because it can lead to a slow wag and hover when it like overcompensates on the summing up. But yeah, if your tail does not turn consistently in fast moves, you just want to increase I until it does. And well, D gain, if you have a slow wag in there that you cannot tune out because your tail servo is crap, because your mechanics have slop. Oh, hi Nick.
Hey. I'm 69 for the win.
You can actually mask that
Good
with
luck.
D gain a bit. Like nothing beats a good tail servo, but you can get by with giving it a tiny bit of D gain. I think I use like 5 or 10 on my Oblivion because there are no good micro tail servos on the market that aren't like crazy expensive. So I mask a slow servo with a bit of D gain so it corrects larger for less like rate acceleration error. And well, it's fine really. It helps a lot with the tail holding in place solidly. And that's PID tuning on the tail in its most basic form. Be really careful with the D gain because it's crazy sensitive on the tail. Like, on my old 690, I could not even set it to 3 without the tail almost exploding from fast and violent wags.
Interesting.
So, yeah, if you have a really decent tail setup, do not even think about adding D-gain. It's probably just making matters worse. Like, it was wagging so quickly that, like, the servo was at its mechanical speed limit for that wag. It was just
and that
violent.
was just the D-gain that you had added, huh?
Yep, 3 points of D-gain. Because 690 had, like, a really powerful, crisp, slop-free tail. Same on my 700. I do not use any D-gain there. Just on smaller helis, it helps a bit with slow tail servos.
Uh-huh.
What else is there on the tail? They have optimizers too. Those do the same thing as on the main rotor. They just determine the pass-through that you need to achieve the rate. And you can pretty much leave the tail optimizer on all the time. That's pretty much what I do. So if you change tail blades, you don't have to worry about that thing optimizing again. Because, like, never leave the main rotor optimizer on, but the tail is fine. The main rotor optimizer will mess you up if you fly normally with it on. The tail optimizer is just gonna constantly keep the tail at crisp stops. It's weird, but that's how it works on a VBar.
Huh.
Yep. And then there's acceleration on the tail that basically just tells the tail how much, like, degrees per second squared, the acceleration of the rate. It's basically a limiter for that because some tail rotors are not as sturdy, some have a belt that slips easily. If you bump up the acceleration too much, you could damage stuff. So default value at 55 is nice. Also, weak torque tubes. If you're afraid of stripping your torque tube, reduce the acceleration. That's what I did on my E700. I'm running 45 there instead of the default 55 because, well, it's just way lighter on the tail. I ran 65 on my 690 because that thing could take pretty much everything. So yeah, acceleration, just how quickly your tail is going to accelerate. I don't even know what happens if you set it to 0. Probably just a bit slower than normal to accelerate. But oh well. Use that mainly to protect your tail from failure. Do we have anything else? Nick, think. Tail values. Oh, stop gains. Yep. Stop.
Yeah,
Stop gains actually are a multiplier by which your gain is raised when you stop the tail. Like if you let go of the stick, the gain is actually raised a tiny bit to make the stop crisper. So you can have really crisp stops without the control loop constantly wagging, which is pretty neat of an idea, but again, it can overload your tail. If you want those really quick and crisp stops, you can increase that a bit, but do not overload your tail mechanics with it. I leave them at default because I'm not into crazy crisp tail stops. But oh well, some people like that.
Yeah, I just like it so it doesn't bounce. I like it to be maybe a little bit softish, but I just don't want to bounce.
All it really does is make the tail loud on stops, so you really know it stopped. I think Kyle Dahl had that a bit high on the 700 Extreme when you always heard it like on stops. That was high tail stop gain.
One of my friends is obsessed with his tail, so he'll like go really fast and stop, and he just does it really fast constantly. Like just in a hover, he'll sit there and spin circles because he loves that stupid noise.
Hey,
well, tell him to bump up the stop gain. Whatever bloats your toad or something. Yep.
Whatever floats your goat. Tail torque precompensation.
Oh, thank you. Torque precompensation. Yeah. So that is basically a pass-through value that's applied whenever you give it collective or cyclic. So you have to understand your rotor is generating a torque that your tail rotor compensates. That's what your tail rotor is mainly there for. That we use it for crazy spinning maneuvers in 3D is just a nice side effect of it being there. So if you are punching in collective, your rotor starts to generate torque, and your tail is starting to twist, and your gyro detects that. The PID loop calculates a counter input for that. Your tail is countering that torque. Now that obviously is not that great because that obviously means your tail has to physically start moving before the sensor detects the error and can compensate for it. So on every collective input, you would basically have a little bit of tail twitch, which would suck royally. So what you're doing is you're giving the tail a bit of precompensation that is just a tiny bit of rad rudder input whenever you move the collective. And that's what torque precompensation does. It scales that input from the collective to the tail. And you ideally set it so that it perfectly compensates your torque of the main rotor without the tail control loop having to do it. Basically the same as optimizers give you the perfect rate for something that will just have to be set to the perfect number to compensate the torque on quick inputs. And that's all there is to it. I usually start out at 30 for the collective and leave my cyclic at 0 because the cyclic on helicopters has a weird tendency to do stuff that's really complicated, but going into it real quick is your blades are not eternally stiff, so you're basically shortening the pendulum that they represent and shortening the phase on the main rotor, so your rotor is going to be at a shorter phase than 90 degrees, which causes your helicopter to cross-couple a little bit. If I really go over the top with it, if you're giving an elevator input, it will roll out, and as aileron has a lower moment of inertia than elevator, it's gonna roll out first, so it rolls, pitches, rolls, pitches, rolls, pitches, rolls, pitches whenever you're giving large cyclic inputs on elevator, blah blah blah. What this results in is basically what you're seeing here. I'm not compensating the tail, my synergy is tail drifting to the right due to this. So if you're adding cyclic precompensation, you're basically just making matters worse because that's pretty much supporting this effect of the cyclic phase being too short. So long story short, do not use cyclic precompensation. It's bad for you. Ta-da.
Interesting.
Yep. I've never used it. I've never needed it. The default value of 8 is, I mean, it's nice to have, but it doesn't do anything for you.
Yeah, I've never touched it.
So yeah, that should really be it for the tail now. So should we go into VBar governor as well?
I think we could probably save VBar gov for another day.
Yeah, we'll save that for another day just due to the fact of we can cover other governors and stuff. Like not just VGov, but we'll cover other governors too. Like external.
So yeah, that is it for...
And if you have any other questions, figure it
pretty
out.
much. And if you're now upset that we haven't told you any specific numbers for your VBar, it's because my idea of finding your flybarless setup is that you understand what the values do and that you find the values for your own flying style. I mean, I could pray you down my stupid setup of style 100, rates 110, gain 70, tail rate 120, tail gain 73, but you would not profit from that because it's going to be different for your flying style, for your helicopter. So understand what the values do, adjust them with a bit of thinking, find what you like, what feels right for you, and you will have a better setup than any other setup given to you from anyone in this world could ever be. Did that make sense? Probably. Find your own setup.
True. I did that with my old 700 on my 700 Extreme. Copied all settings. It flew nice. It was definitely past what I should have had, though, for race and stuff when I was first with my 700. But, yeah, I mean, I eventually had to change it because it just wasn't my style. Yeah, you can get his numbers. Will it fly like his? there's a chance. Will you fly like him? No.
That's exactly the point. It's not even gonna fly like
They're
this
just
because
numbers.
even if he has just a tiny bit of different setup, like one different dampener ring per side, it's just gonna
Give
fly
one ball
completely
link.
different and not gonna match at all. Like Kyle Dahl at one point had 3 identical Logo 700s, 700 Extremes. He had to adjust his numbers to different settings for them all 3 to fly the same, even though they had identical setups. So, numbers from other people.
Huh.
Who gives a fuck? Find your own setup. Find what suits you. That's the best thing you can do.
And one other thing is don't have the same setting for every single thing. I mean, you could start there, but it's not going to work for
You're
every
right.
single
Just the
thing
settings
you
by
have.
RPM.
For
Range
Correct.
different
may
head
be different
speeds
per
and stuff
bank.
like that. Yeah.
Yep. Just for flying style.
Yeah.
For example, I run higher expo on my low RPM just because it's easier to control. I run slightly higher rates on my low RPM so I can get the heli around quicker because I have less lift. These kind of small things are things you really got to figure out for your flying, but they are the key to progress and to find your own style. Do not just copy setups. Do not just copy flying styles. It's all the same stuff for pretty much everything in this hobby. Find what suits you and get it right, basically.
Good advice.
And yeah, this is how I'm ending this episode, I suppose.
Ta-da!
So, if you have any questions, email us. Shoot us a message on Facebook. If you have any topics you want to have covered in the special episodes that are coming up over the winter, which we can prepare for a bit longer. Now's your chance because we can really work deeply into what we're putting into that episode. Otherwise, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We're definitely not going away yet, just slowing down for the winter.
Yep.
Give us feedback. We like feedback. Except for the bad.
Yeah, we do. Send all hate mail to Johnny this time. Just kidding. Let's go to
man,
Sage.
I thought
Sage
I've been
has gotten hate
skating
mail
this
a
whole
long
time.
Yeah, you have. It's been like half a
Just
year since you've gotten
because.
hate mail. It's time for you.
And, well, then I'd say thanks for watching.
Otherwise,
See you next
Thanks.
one.
Bye.
yeah. Thanks, guys.
Bye.